Physio Rooms Woodvale, and today we're going to be talking about hamstring tears and strains. So coming up to the beginning of the footy season, we know that Physio Rooms we're going to be really busy dealing with lots of muscle injuries, and hamstring muscle injuries tend to be the most common thing that we see. So our series of videos is going to take us through an acute phase or an early phase of injury and what we can do about it, and in our following videos we'll progress that to include some of the intermediate and advanced stages of rehab. So with our hamstring tears and strains, it's really common to feel pain in the mid-muscle belly, so usually kind of right in the middle of the hamstring, and sometimes it can be off to one side or the other. What will often happen is you'll have an acceleration or a deceleration mechanism of injury. Often what you see when you're watching footy is those players that are sprinting after a ball, pull up and they get really sore really quickly. The grades of injury can actually vary from grade 1, which is a simple strain, a grade 2, which is a partial tear, all the way up into a grade 3, which is a rupture. And a good sign that you're perhaps into the grade 2 or the grade 3 is that you'll often get bruising which comes from mid-belly of the hamstring, usually comes all the way down and into the calf muscle. That could be a really good indication that there's a tear, because obviously bruising means that there's been some bleeding inside there. Okay, so most people are aware of some of the simple things that you can do in the management of an early hamstring strain or tear. Those would be protect, rest, ice, compression and elevation. But most people don't realise that you can actually get stuck in and do a little bit of physio from the get-go. In exceptional cases where perhaps we're expecting a grade 3 rupture and or we have an athlete who is playing at a very high level, a scan may be required. But certainly for the grade 1s and grade 2s, we can start implementing some treatment from day 1. So here, Ash is just going to show you a really nice static or an isometric activation exercise for the hamstrings. So she's got her right knee bent and she's just gently pushing her heel down into the mat, and that's going to switch on hamstring muscles through here. And the instructions to Ash would be to hold this for as long as she can tolerate, and with further instructions as to not aggravate her pain after she's done the exercise. Some people might find that the position at 90 degrees is a little bit too much, so we can always bring the leg down a little bit and start from a slightly less angle on the knee, and people might find that more tolerable to start with. Another exercise that we find people can tolerate really well is a shoulder bridge. So Ash is going to demonstrate this for us now. So this is simply lifting your bum in the air, and we get really good core contraction of your glutes and your hamstrings at the same time. Now, again, same rules apply in that it should be non-provocative of pain after you finish the exercise. A little bit of discomfort during generally is okay, so long as it settles really quickly afterwards. And our final early activation exercise is what we call a prone hamstring curl. So here we can see Ash is lying on her tummy and she's simply bringing the heel up towards the bum. This is giving us a really nice contraction of the hamstring muscles on that side. Again, we find that people with grade 1s and 2s can tolerate this really well. If it's a grade 1 injury, you may find that you can add some resistance. So Ash is just going to put her opposite foot across her heel, and by providing just a little bit of external force, it makes her work her hamstring muscles that little bit harder. Same rule again, it should be settling down really quickly after you've completed this exercise. So guys, I hope you enjoyed that video. That's a really nice guide for some early exercises that you can complete post-hamstring injury. But we do understand it can be a confusing place when you've hurt your hamstrings, and particularly when you've had an injury recently. So if you're in any doubt, please feel free to drop in. We'd love to assess you and we'd love to give you some good advice and get you back on the road to recovery.